It started with a slap. The sound echoed through the quiet bus as everyone turned to see a woman, probably in her 40s, striking her elderly mother across the arm. The older woman flinched but said nothing. Her eyes focused on the floor. The daughter hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're so useless. Can't you do anything right? No wonder Dad left you. Hey there. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe to join me for more powerful real-life stories that spark change and inspire strength. Together we can explore stories of resilience, justice, and the moments that make a difference. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard. So let's grow this community of changemakers. Click subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together." The bus went dead silent. Some passengers looked away, clearly uncomfortable, while others just stared, unsure of what to do. The elderly woman, her hair thin and gray, her hands trembling as they gripped her purse, whispered something. But the daughter cut her off. "Shut up. You embarrass me every time we go out." She rolled her eyes dramatically and leaned back in her seat, as if she'd just won an argument. The mother shrank further into herself, her shoulders hunching. I sat a few rows back, feeling my stomach churn. A few seats ahead, a tall, older black man wearing a worn army jacket shifted in his seat. He had one of those faces that told us storylines etched deep into his skin, a beard streaked with gray. I noticed his hands clenching the strap of his duffel bag. Finally, he stood up. The man moved slowly but with purpose, steadying himself as the bus jolted to a stoplight. He walked down the aisle and stopped in front of the daughter. For a moment, I thought he might yell or get in her face. But instead, he spoke in a calm, even voice. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "I couldn't help but hear what you said to your mother." The daughter glared at him. "Mind your business, old man." The man didn't flinch. "You're right, it's not my business, but I couldn't sit there and watch someone talk to their mom like that. Seriously, who do you think you are?" she snapped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photo. Holding it up for her to see, it was faded and creased, but you could make out a young man in a uniform, smiling with his arm around a woman. "That's me and my mom," he said. "She raised me on her own after my dad left, worked 2 jobs. Never complained. She passed away 5 years ago." The bus was completely silent now, even the driver was watching in the mirror. "I would give anything," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Anything to have one more day with her, to hear her laugh, or even just sit next to her like you are now. And here you are, treating yours like she doesn't matter." The daughter opened her mouth but seemed to think better of it. Her face turned red as she looked around, realizing the whole bus was watching. "Respect your mother," the man said, his voice firm now. "You don't get to treat her like trash. You don't know how many more days you'll have with her. Don't waste them like this." For a moment, no one moved. The daughter looked down, avoiding his gaze, while her mother sat frozen, her eyes wide and teary. The man didn't say another word. He tucked the photo back into his pocket and returned to his seat. Staring out the window, the daughter didn't speak again for the rest of the ride. When the bus reached her stop, she stood up and helped her mother to her feet. Murmuring something I couldn't hear, they got off together. And for the first time since I'd noticed them, the daughter wasn't walking ahead or yelling. The black veteran stayed on the bus as we approached the next stop. I passed by his seat on my way to the door. I wanted to say something to thank him, but all I managed was, "That was brave." He shook his head. "It wasn't brave," he said. "It was necessary." I got off the bus, feeling the weight of his words. Sometimes, it takes just one person to stand up and remind us of what really matters. As I stood on the curb, the bus pulled away, but my mind stayed stuck on the scene that had just unfolded. The weight of the veteran's words settled deep in my chest. It was necessary. I kept thinking about how close the rest of us had been to doing nothing. Most of us had just sat there watching in silence. Sure, we felt uncomfortable, even angry, but none of us moved. What was it about the man in the army jacket that made him different? Maybe it was his age or his experiences. Or maybe he was just the kind of person who couldn't walk past someone being hurt. Either way, it struck me we all have chances to step in, and most of us let them slip away as the week went on. I couldn't stop replaying the moment. At first, it felt like just another random encounter you'd forget in a few days. But it wasn't. It stuck with me. Part of it was the veteran's courage, but part of it was something else, what his actions did to the atmosphere on that bus. Something had changed when he stood up. It was like he broke through a wall everyone else was too scared to touch. Afterward, it wasn't just the daughter who looked humbled. I noticed other people, young couples, friends, strangers starting to talk to each other in hushed voices, some even exchanging knowing nods. He didn't just stand up to the daughter, he reminded all of us that we were a community, even for just one bus ride. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I found myself on the same route. And wouldn't you know it, the same veteran climbed on. He looked exactly the same, worn jacket, weary eyes, but this time, he had a slight limp I hadn't noticed before. I moved over to make room for him to sit next to me. "Hey," I said, trying not to sound awkward. "I saw you a few weeks ago that day with the mother and daughter." He looked at me, his face softening as he nodded. "I remember, I just wanted to say," I stammered, "that what you did, it stuck with me. I can't stop thinking about it." He sighed and adjusted the strap of his bag. "It wasn't about me, son. It was about her." I nodded, but pressed on, and still, "You spoke up when no one else did. That takes guts." He let out a small laugh, more sad than amused. "You think I was fearless?" He shook his head. "I was scared as hell. These days, standing up for something feels like walking through fire, but you do it anyway because letting it slide, that eats at you more." His words hit me harder than I expected. I realized that what he'd done wasn't just for the mother, it was a stand against all the little injustices we let pass us by every day. "I needed to see that," I said after a moment. "It reminded me that staying quiet is just as bad as being part of the problem." The man looked out the window and smiled faintly. "We all part of the problem if we're not trying to make it better." Before I could respond, the bus slowed at the next stop. To my surprise, the same daughter from a few weeks ago climbed on, but this time, she wasn't alone. Her mother was with her again, and the dynamic between them was different. There was no tension, no yelling. They sat down side by side, the daughter helping her mother with her scarf when it slipped loose. I caught the veteran's eye, and he raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Told you it was worth it." Neither of us said anything, but I could see a quiet satisfaction in his face. He gave me a small nod before standing up for his stop, and as he walked to the door, I noticed he moved a little lighter than before, like a man who knew he'd done what he could. After he left, I stared at the daughter and mother, the memory of the slap from weeks ago fresh in my mind. The change wasn't big, but it was there, a hint of respect, a flicker of care. It was small, sure, but sometimes small shifts grow into something bigger. That bus ride changed me. It taught me that you don't have to be perfect or fearless to do the right thing. You just have to care enough to try. And maybe, just maybe, someone else will see it and decide to care too. As the bus rumbled along, I couldn't stop glancing at the daughter and her mother. The change was subtle but undeniable. The daughter leaned over at one point, asking softly if her mother wanted her water bottle. Her voice wasn't dripping with sarcasm or disdain like before, it was careful, almost tender. Her mother nodded with a small smile, and I noticed how her hands shook less as she reached for the bottle. It was such a simple exchange, and yet it felt like I was witnessing something rare healing. The bus ride ended, but the memory of that veteran's act stayed with me for months. Every time I found myself in situations where I felt I should speak up at work, in the grocery store, even at family gatherings, I'd hear his voice in my head, letting it slide. That eats at you more. One night, I got the chance to put those words to the test. I was at a diner late after work. It was the kind of quiet spot where the jukebox played old tunes and the waitresses always called you hon. I was nursing a cup of coffee when I noticed a couple at the counter, an older black man and a younger guy who looked like he might be a teenager. They were clearly related, probably a grandfather and grandson. The older man was patient, explaining something about the menu, while the boy scrolled on his phone. Not far from them sat a group of guys in their early 20s. They weren't loud, but they were talking just loud enough for their conversation to carry snickers, a few muttered words. Then one of them said something I won't repeat, something sharp and soaked in hate. The older man paused mid-sentence, his shoulders stiffening. He looked over, his face carefully neutral, and then back to his grandson. The boy didn't seem to notice, but the tension in the room was impossible to miss. The group of guys laughed low and mean. I froze. My coffee tasted bitter now, but it wasn't from the drink. I felt the same sick churning I'd felt on that bus weeks ago, the same paralysis. The same question nagging at me, do I say something? This time, though, I thought of the man in the army jacket. I thought about his words, his courage, and what he told me about fear. My heart was pounding, but I stood up. My legs felt wobbly as I approached the group. "Hey," I said, louder than I'd intended. They turned, their faces shifting between surprise and annoyance. "Do you think that's funny?" My voice shook, but I kept going. "The stuff you're saying, it's ugly. You've got no right to make someone else feel small for just being here." For a moment, no one said anything. Then one of the guys scoffed, muttering something under his breath. But they all went quiet after that. They didn't leave. But the sneering and laughter stopped. I sat back down, trying not to show how much my hands were shaking. I glanced at the older man at the counter. He didn't look at me, but I noticed the slightest dip of his head, a wordless thank you. I could see his grandson looking confused, clearly unaware of what had just happened. And I thought to myself, maybe that was the point. Maybe the younger boy wouldn't grow up thinking it was normal to be belittled simply because someone stood up, even if just for a moment. When I left the diner, I realized something had shifted inside me. The man on the bus didn't just teach me to stand up for others, he'd taught me the power of stepping in, even when it feels messy, awkward, or terrifying. And maybe, just maybe, his lesson rippled out to more people than he'd ever realize, one act of courage leading to another, one small ripple becoming a wave. That night at the diner stayed with me for a long time. I thought about how hard it was to push myself into action, how every fiber in my body had screamed at me to stay quiet, not make it worse, not put myself in the spotlight. But after it was over, something in me felt lighter, like I'd finally stopped carrying some invisible burden I hadn't even realized was there. And then, weeks later, it all came full circle. I was back on that same bus route, the usual rhythm of my commute settling into familiarity. I didn't think I'd see them again, the black veteran, the mother and daughter, but life has a funny way of surprising you. This time, it wasn't just an encounter. It felt like I was being reminded of something I didn't even know I needed to see. It started when the bus pulled to a stop, and the daughter and her mother got on. I recognized them immediately, but something about them was different. The daughter still looked stressed. She had that tired, frazzled expression so many people carried. But the way she held her mother's arm was tender, protective. Even as they walked down the aisle, the mother stumbled slightly and the daughter didn't bark or snap. Instead, she leaned closer, whispering something I couldn't hear. The mother laughed softly, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen before. They found a seat near the front, and as the daughter helped her mother settle in, she pulled out a small bag and handed it to her. It was just a sandwich, but the way the mother beamed. You'd think she'd been handed a gift wrapped in gold. I didn't want to stare, but I couldn't look away either. Watching them, I felt that same ripple I'd felt the day the veteran spoke up. This was the kind of change you don't often see, quiet, slow, but deeply real. And then, as if fate had planned it, the next stop brought the man in the army jacket back onto the bus. He didn't notice me, but I noticed him. He looked the same, weathered, steady, purposeful, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made you feel like everything might just be okay. As he walked past the mother and daughter, he paused, glancing down at them. He didn't say anything, but the daughter looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. It was quick, just a nod from the veteran, a small, almost imperceptible smile from the daughter, but it was enough. They didn't need words. That brief moment said everything: recognition, gratitude, growth. The man moved down the aisle, found a seat near the back, and stared out the window like he always did. I wanted to approach him, to tell him what I'd seen, how that one moment weeks ago had spiraled into something bigger, but I didn't need to. Somehow, I think he already knew. When the bus reached my stop, I hesitated at the door. I glanced back at the veteran, then at the mother and daughter, and in that instant, I realized something important. Courage isn't about being fearless or loud or even bold. Sometimes, it's just about showing up and doing what you can, even if you never know the full impact of your actions. For the rest of the day, I carried that thought with me, and every time I hesitated, whether it was holding a door for someone, stopping to help a stranger with a question, or just smiling at someone who looked like they'd had a hard day, I thought about how those small acts could be the start of something bigger. Because maybe the ripples we create aren't ours to measure. Maybe the only thing that matters is starting them in the first place.